Today on Passion for Food, I'll show you how to make 2 great meals from 1 roast. First, I'll share some tricks to make this perfect beef pot roast, and then with the leftovers we're going to make this amazingly easy beef stew. After all, it would be a little stupid not to use our leftovers properly, and this stew is just stupid easy to make. So without further ado about the stew, let's go ahead and get started here and talk about our roast. Whenever I do this twofer recipe, I like to get the biggest chuck roast I can find, and I do think chuck is the perfect cut for this because it has a lot of that fat distributed in between the meat, and that really helps keep it moist as we're cooking it. And the only thing I'm going to do here before we sear this is salt it thoroughly on both sides. I'm going to wait to pepper it until later. I don't want to risk burning that pepper as we sear our beef. I suppose technically speaking the searing is optional, but I definitely wouldn't skip this step. What's happening during searing is something called the Maillard reaction, where various proteins and sugars fuse together through heat to release potentially thousands of different flavor compounds that you can't get any other way. We want to sear this for 4 or 5 minutes over medium-high heat, and you can tell it's ready to flip when it will release from the pan. You see that beautiful brown we got on that one side, and after about another 4 minutes or so, you can see it got nice and brown on that other side. So we can go ahead and pull this off of here and just dump out all of that oil. We don't need that. Now we've developed a lot of awesome flavor through that browning, but we're not done yet. I'm also going to stuff some garlic in here. Let's just go ahead and peel that. And instead of cutting into the meat, what I like to do is cut along where these little veins of fat are. You see, there are lots of flavor compounds in garlic that are more oil soluble than they are water soluble. So I think we get a little more flavor bang for our buck actually stuffing the garlic in these little pockets of fat versus cutting into the meat and stuffing them in there. And the way the roast will constrict a little as it cooks really traps all the garlic in there, so that by the time this is fully cooked, it'll have this wonderful just sort of hint of garlic infused all through the meat and broth. So back into the pot we go, but we're not quite done yet. Just to prevent the top from drying out and for some extra flavor, I'm going to add 1 sliced onion. We just want to lay these out in an even layer on top of our roast. These are going to wind up kind of like little islands because we're going to actually braise this. Some might consider that a bit of a brazen move, but I definitely find I get the best results out of chuck roasts when I braise them this way. And because we got that great sear on them ahead of time, we're not missing out on any of that classic roast flavor. So we just want to cover that with water nearly all the way to the top. Just leave a little bit exposed. And it's now that I'm actually going to get cracking with some fresh cracked black pepper. We've got quite a bit of braising liquid here, so don't be shy about the pepper, and we're also going to add about 1.5 teaspoons of salt. Once our braising liquid comes up to a simmer, we just want to cook this covered in a 350-degree oven for about 30 minutes per pound. Now, I know what you might be thinking, hey, what, no roast potatoes? Well, don't worry, I have you covered. We're going to make some easy fondant potatoes to go with our beef pot roast. First, we just want to peel some potatoes. And then we're just going to slice them into rounds. The main thing here is that they have 2 flat sides, because we're going to actually be searing these in about 1 tablespoon of butter. Not only does that add a lot of great flavor, but we're going to get a great crunch on the underside of these potatoes as well. After 2 or 3 minutes, we can go ahead and give these a check, and assuming they're seared enough to our liking, we'll go ahead and give them a flip. And continue to sear until they're nicely golden brown. This is actually a technique I first learned from the legendary Chef John of Food Wishes, and I've only made one small modification. Where Chef John suggests you use a full cup of stock, I only like to use half a cup. I feel like if you use a whole cup, the bottom of these potatoes never get crispy enough. And I'm just a huge fan of crispy roast potatoes. So we want to go ahead and stash this in the oven next to our beef for the final hour of cooking. So if our roast needs a total of 3 hours, we want our potatoes to go in at hour number 2. Once our roast comes out, I still like to check just to make sure it's cooked enough. And the easiest way is just to stick a fork in and see if you can kind of pull it apart. If you can, then your roast is ready. At least if we're talking about a fatty chuck roast like this. If we're dealing with the eye of round or some other roast, then slightly different rules apply. But this was perfect, so let's go ahead and pull this out. But don't worry, we're not going to waste this wonderful garlic and onion infused braising liquid. To that, we're going to add a slurry consisting of 1/4 cup of cornstarch and water. And this is just going to thicken this into a beautiful gravy. which is just a fantastic topper for what I think is the perfect pot roast. And I know I technically braised it, but I'm going to keep calling it a pot roast anyway. What are you going to do about it? You're not going to do anything. Now, this is definitely one of my favorite meals, but a close second is actually what I do with the leftovers. So let's go ahead and fast forward to the next day, and I'll show you what has to be the easiest and most delicious beef stew ever. For the base, we're actually going to be using that leftover gravy from the previous meal. And to start with, I'm going to add about 1.5 pounds of these baby potatoes, but they weren't quite baby potato enough for me, so I'm going to practice my slap chopping skills. I should probably tip my striking instructor sometime. Anyway, let's go ahead and add our leftover roast beef. I've just cut these into little cubes. I've got a little over 1.5 pounds here. I'm also going to add 2 14-ounce cans of stewed tomatoes, and I just like to break these up a little bit with my hand. Nobody likes to get, just a spoonful of one huge tomato. Well, I don't know. Maybe you do. Hey, you do you. We're also going to add 1 can each of corn and beans. Don't drain these. The liquid from the corn, beans, and tomatoes are the only additional liquid we're going to be adding here. We'll just give this a quick mix and then season lightly with salt and pepper. We don't have to go too crazy with the seasonings here because we know that gravy base we're using was pretty well seasoned to start with. And finally, I'm going to add 1 large bay leaf. Now that's optional. You don't have to add that if you don't want to. We'll just give that a quick mix as it comes back up to a simmer. And once it does, we'll just slap a lid on here, and we want to simmer this on low for about 30 minutes or until those potatoes are tender. But that's it. This delicious beef stew is ready to eat. And you really can't beat the simplicity of this, and especially if we did a good job on the pot roast, this is going to be one of the most delicious beef stews of your life. And on the simplicity scale, this really has to be a 10 out of 10. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode and this recipe double header. If you have, give me a thumbs up below and don't forget to subscribe and hit that little bell so you don't miss our future episodes. And check out one of our other great recipes playing on the screen now. And let me know in the comments below what foods you're passionate about, and I might feature it in a future episode. This has been Graham with Passion for Food.